Thank you very much. As I said, members, and I will ask a little bit of indulgence to walk through because it is a significant bill and it is some major discussion. But let me put aside a few images that have come out of the earlier procedural discussions. There is not much here, members, that has not been through a variety of policy committees in this House and in the other House over the last several years. What is awkward, and I think as Senator Hollingsworth pointed out, procedurally we're in an odd place, but about half of the large stack of amendments before you has to do with the Public Safety Commission and the fact that in order to give that commission jurisdiction to review, not to lower necessarily, increase necessarily, whatever, to review, as we do in the constitutional law revision commissions, as we do in all sorts of other law review commissions, to give the proposed Public Safety Commission the ability to review those statutes, you must actually reprint each statute and put a little line in it that says, and they can look at this. That is about half of the size of what we are looking at. So let's get to the elements, most of which, many of the base of this were the things discussed that came out of Subcommittee 4 last year, that have been in bills on this floor over the last year in a variety of forms, last October, last December. A large piece of this has to do with that. Two components of it were policy bills, one that I carried and one that Senator Leno and Senator Benoit have carried that have been both moved off of this floor, whose content is now incorporated into this bill. I would argue that this has been debated. We have all known for some long period of time now the highest cost item, the biggest expenditure increases in the state budget over the last several years have been the cost of prisons. Certainly, Senator Harman's point about the medical care is valid, and as soon as you convince the court, we're with you. But right now, we are under a receiver and a federal court who are not allowing us to do some of the things that probably would create some of that savings in healthcare. And certainly, healthcare has been an enormous piece of the driver behind that increase in costs. Certainly, we can reuse facilities. Senator Benoit points out in Department of Juvenile Justice, in addition to the long-range reduction, it's really a bill that we all passed a couple of years ago that realigned juveniles to counties, much as is proposed to do in some fashion in this bill. In fact, that's starting to work. We're using the savings from DJJ to pay counties to ensure that communities are dealing better with our children and finding ways to keep those juveniles from going into the system. What that results in, members, and part of the problem with the cost that Senator Benoit points out, is that the hardest core of the hardest core are the ones that remain in the state facilities. And they do require a much higher staff ratio to be safe. They require a much higher staff ratio to deal with medical and mental health and substance abuse and all sorts of issues. But we are keeping the hardest core of the hardest core, and we have had to increase our staffing ratio to do that. So all of those things are component, and if we all know, last week in Chino, we saw what can happen with the results of the vast overcrowding. And 3 weeks ago, while we were on our brief break, the court said, and we will, if you do not, find ways to sensibly and in ways that are acceptable to the court, start to reduce that prison population in some rational way. You know, the court is suggesting that we ought to release over 44,000 prisoners and straight up. And I do think the fears that Senator Runner and Senator Ashburn, some of you expressed, probably would happen if we allow the court to do this job for us. But members, it's our responsibility to figure out, you know, what is the policy of the state, how are we treating public safety, and how are we going to get better results? Because members, we all know the results we've been getting are not good. Not only are they costly, but we are not getting better results in crime. And unfortunately, and I think, you know, Senator Walters talks about the cost of rehabilitation, but the truth is, we know in most cases, and the reason I think that the committee, the Budget Committee in earlier discussions this year did not reduce the rehabilitation more, was because all of the data and evidence we have anywhere says if people complete programs, they're less likely to be returned to prison. That if they are, in fact, do get a high school diploma, if they do get a GED, if they do get vocationally trained, if they participate in the apprenticeship program at Folsom, they are much more likely to remain out of that prison in the future, saving us all those several hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've been talking about. So the question here, members, is the policy of the state today is not working. We know, and we've known for 3 years, we've been talking about this in budget and in policy and everywhere, that more than 20,000, and sometimes a much higher percentage of the people who are in the state prison today are there for parole violations, not for commissions of new crimes. And so the question, members, what does that mean? Well, parole violation, and I figured this out the other day, I don't know if Senator Harmon was there aren't very many of us who were ever criminal lawyers left around here. But the truth is, a lot of those folks, what happens to them is you sent back for 4 months. You spend a couple of months in county custody waiting to be sent to a parole board hearing. You spend a few months waiting for your Valdivia waiver. You get dropped into the reception center, and 4 months later, you're back out on the street, having done nothing except sort of cycle through the system. That's the way the parole violation system works today. Those are some of the most costly people in the system because they take all of our time to figure out who they are, to put them somewhere, and we are not designed, our prison system is not designed to handle people who are put in custody for less than a year. That's what county jails, probation systems, and counties are designed to do. So let's start talking about what's the reality of our system. And the things that this bill does are threefold. One is deal primarily with this parole issue. So the two bills that I talked about, parole reentry courts, giving judges the same kind of powers that have worked so effectively for us in drug courts and in mental health courts throughout this state, to give parole a way to say certain types of violators, certain types of violations, people with mental health and drug abuse problems can be sent to a court for oversight with a team, with a parole officer, the way that we do drug courts now. That we will set up 10 courts like that throughout the state. We are using federal dollars to jumpstart that program because in the long run, if the courts can get control, if they can use community resources and maintain the prescriptions that keep their mental health issues inclined, if they can be kept in their families, that's all positive to the system and there will be savings. So that's one piece, parole reentry courts. Number two, the Benoit-Leno proposal for felony probation. Almost all felons in prison are people who are former probationers in one form or another. These are recommendations that have come out of the expert panel commissions, Little Hoover, every sentencing, every buddy who has looked at our prison system over the last several years, the LAO, all of these proposals have come out of those kinds of discussions. That one says, counties, we're going to give you extra money, just as we did to lower the juvenile population and said to counties, if you can figure out how to better serve your juvenile delinquents in your county, we will give you additional resources from the savings we get by not sending them to those very expensive DJJ facilities that Senator Benoit talked about. So this proposal says for adult felony probationers, we will provide to the counties, and there is $45 million in federal stimulus funds allocated for this purpose to start the program. That counties, we're going to give you extra money to do the probationary services that will help keep these people from going to prison. So I would argue this is not so much about release, as folks have talked. This is about trying to stop people from becoming those recidivist prisoners that are costing us so much money as a society and in a state budgetary sense. So that's one, and that one will be ultimately funded by the savings because counties will be asked for performance-based measurements on how many people are you managing to keep from reoffending and from being felons that are sent directly to state prison. The piece that people talk about is, and I think we've heard this term over and over again, I will argue that it is not in the bill anywhere. This is not about early release. It is called alternative custody, and it is no different than the authority that this body has given to sheriffs now for several years. County sheriffs have the authority under current law to do what is called alternative custody. Because I don't know about your counties, my county's been working under a court-ordered cap in the prisons, in the jails, since I can remember, since I became a lawyer in 1979, I think. You know, a lot of us have overcrowding issues in local jails. And sheriffs have been given authority to figure out alternative custody methods, including house arrest, including GPS. Senator Runner, big GPS fan. You know, we have done that for counties. And now we would like the opportunity, and the Secretary has asked for the authority, the Secretary of Corrections has asked for the authority for him to be able to have that same kind of discretion that sheriffs have at the county level. And this bill circumscribes that authority much more so than what the sheriffs have actually, and limits the population to whom with whom the Secretary can exercise that discretion. It limits it to elderly, permanently disabled, and folks who are low risk and have less than 12 months to serve. So over the last 3 or 4 years, one of the other positive things we've done is that prisons have finally come up with a risk assessment tool. It is being used today. It is something that has been validated. You know, there is a lot of that going on. It goes back to a bill that some of you voted for that I carried a few years ago on intermediate sanctions to start to address this question of how to deal with parole violators, especially those who are technical violators, not folks who have committed new crimes. So on alternative custody, does allow for him to do that. They would still be in state custody. I know some of the counties have been nervous. We would still be responsible. However we can do it, if we can work out for the federal government to pay portions of their health care, you know, more power to us if we can get Medicare or Medi-Cal to help. But the truth is, they will be in state custody during that period of time. They will not just be on parole. They will be subject to all of the requirements, the immediate search and seizure, the unwarrantless entry to their homes, all of the things that would happen to you if you're in regular physical custody in a state prison facility. The next piece is credits. We all know, you know, since determinate sentencing came in, we don't have as many tools to help people behave better or worse, you know, to take credits away, to improve credits. This would give some discretion to the department to be able to enhance credits if people complete those things that we know will help with the recidivism rate. If you complete your GED, if you complete the vocational program, if you complete some other, you know, those kinds of programs, substance abuse programs, then in fact the prison can have the authority to offer you additional good time credits for that good behavior that we know statistically is less likely to result in you returning to prison. Additionally, it does some day for day that are pretty technical. Those bills have been on the floor before. So I'd argue not much of this is news, members. Then you get to the sentencing part, which I know has been some of the most troublesome for many people. Most of the sentencing changes here, or those which we talked about last year and in December and several times this year, moving the property crimes thresholds up because they had not been changed, members, since 1982. So, you know, the $100, $200 things that could become felonies, we move those. And we move the threshold up so that at a higher threshold of dollar amount, it's still a misdemeanor. So that's the major piece here. The governor had asked, if you will recall, in January, to make 73 different crimes no longer wobblers. What this bill does is not that. It does 3. Petty theft with a prior, receiving stolen property, and check kiting would become misdemeanors. That means, misdemeanor means, you could do up to 1 year in jail. It means it doesn't change priors, it doesn't change enhancements, it doesn't change anything to do with violent or serious felons, it doesn't do any of those things, but it does make some people misdemeanors. And then you have these threshold changes. So, I mean, that's the essence of the sentencing. And then the one key piece that I know has raised a lot of concern is the Sentencing Commission. So all of those would be subject to change if the if the Public Safety Commission, as it's called, were to reviewing all of the different statutes and all of the different ways of doing things, as many other states, who was it, Senator Strickland, one of you talked about the other states. Many other states have done sentencing commissions and found they have better public safety. They have much better control over their prison population because they have a better sense for what they're doing. All of those things, our laws have not been seriously reviewed. It's difficult for us members, just as our Tax Reform Commission is reviewing all of the tax, just as the Law Revision Commission all the time looks at our mobile home laws and a whole variety of different things. This is a commission that would be assigned, and most of the members of it, again, would be public safety officials, a district attorney, a sheriff, a police chief, 3 judges, 2 criminal justice academics, a legal scholar, all of them to review all of this. And it doesn't say lower all the sentences, let everybody out. It says review them. Make recommendations, suggest rules and regulations, and when those come out, by a majority vote of the legislature, any of those suggestions that they make can be rejected. So there are plenty of protections in this bill, and I would argue, members, continuing to do things the way they are, not changing the status quo, that is not acceptable at this point to the court. It's not acceptable to the safety of our public safety officers, including especially our prison guards. It will lower the parole caseload so people can actually focus on those high-risk offenders that everybody's concerned about by banking the caseload of the lower-risk offenders based on a real assessment of who they are and what the likelihood is of their reoffending. The Secretary is asking for some of the discretion that's been given to others. We are looking at best practices, things that the expert panels have recommended for years. All of these things, it is a major change, and it is all lumped into one bill, which makes it harder for people to digest. But the truth is, all of these have been around, and it is time, members, for us to take a step forward in public safety. Secretary Cate has argued with many of us that he believes this is a positive step in public safety. He will have the discretion to do some of these things. We don't need to ask the pro tem and people to sign off. The Secretary of Corrections is the person who will be responsible. There is accountability in that. We know exactly what we're doing, who's accountable, and giving them an opportunity to try to manage this prison system in a way that will allow the state to move forward and invest the money that's necessary in the long run in child welfare, in foster care, in those programs that Senator Ashburn talked about that are necessary to keep people out of prisons in the future. If we do not change the ratio of the dollars we're spending in prisons to support 170,000 people so that that is no longer more than what we're spending to educate 3 million college students, we are never going to get out of this economic mess. Ask for your aye vote.